I too was quite surprised when I found out that seated council people were in fact going out and organizing the opposition for the hearing, which kind of surprised me that we came across an email from Robin Eshelmiller to her campaign, Eshelman, to her campaign supporters that basically asked them to oppose the charter amendment, and claiming first that there's virtually no problems, then immediately recognizing we've had 3 or 4 problems, and giving 7 reasons why she opposes the legislation. Now, this is sent out in advance of that hearing, and it seems fair that we should address her issues, don't you suppose? So the first issue she has is that had this legislation been in place past years, fine civil servants like loyal, a couple of people she names, would not have been allowed to run for office. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
No, and it's not. I mean, it's just a matter, no one's being denied the right to run for office. And as a business owner myself, if I had a contract with the city, you know, so I do T-shirts. I'm a T-shirt guy. And if I was selling T-shirts to the city, I would really feel compelled to make a choice. I would either say I'm going to continue with my contract, or public service is important enough to me. And I'm not holding myself up as some kind of model for this, but I just think it's common sense. I would not want somebody looking at me out of the corner of their eye thinking, oh yeah, well he's rigging the system, or he's, you know, just the perception of impropriety there would be enough to make me say, okay, public service is important enough, I'll drop my contract.
Okay, another thing she raises that this kind of legislation makes sense in Omaha. In fact, Omaha's had this banned, or in fact a much tougher one for the last 50 years.
Much more draconian.
But that somehow Lincoln is such a small city that we'll need to, if we need a bid for lawn care or office building space, and we don't have that many vendors in town to choose from due to council members with conflicts of interest. Do you think that's legitimate?
I think, you know, let's just realize it. Lincoln's a growing city, and it's grown past the point where it's so. I mean, that's just a weak argument.
Well, the reality is Omaha is perceived as a very business-friendly community.
Sure, yeah.
But
I mean, much more than us.
Well, and maybe that's because you're on one side or the other. You're not competing against the insiders for the job.
Yeah.
And on the other thing she says is that the legislature is a subtle way of silencing speech, the speech of the business owner. Do you believe that's true?
Yeah, I feel quite like I'm really held down, like I can't make any. No, I don't. I just think that's poppycock. You know, really. Like once again, you know, as a business owner, I don't feel like I'm being. I think the word that was used by Mr. Mock was discrimination, and you know, I just don't really see this as a discrimination issue. No, I don't feel like my free speech rights have been stepped on by this.
This kind of what they allowed to run for office. The point is, you either choose to run for office, or you choose to serve the public.
Exactly.
And that's a choice you and I, as small businessmen, are both making by either not being on the council or by running for the council. Yeah. I would agree that I shouldn't profit from.
I mean, how many people will this really affect? I mean,
very few.
Very few people.
Very few. But it's very important because we've had a problem with the city of Lincoln and the distractions, and that's where it all comes from. It was a distraction to our mayor's race. It was a distraction once our mayor got elected.
Even if everything was done according to the rules that were in place, it still became a distraction.
Yep, and we still have a problem with. Well, it's not a problem, but you know, John Camp is renting space while we have a 3rd floor that's not developed. Right. And you know, as you said, why do you hold yourself out to even being questioned? And I'm not suggesting Mr. Camp has done anything wrong at all. I'm simply saying that there's those people that will question whether you should be doing that at the same time you're making rather important decisions.
Exactly.
There's another one of Robin's points is that city employees are allowed to hold contracts with the city, and I answer that a little bit is that, yeah, there's a clause in here, and it's retained, that they have to declare their conflict of interest and make it known, and that but this actually gives them a remedy by which they can step aside and still be a part of. We didn't want to ban people from repping games for Parks and Recs because they happen to be city employees. And so that is preserved, and that is existing law. She says something about city employees are nearly impossible to fire, and I'm not sure how that's very relevant, Rick. Well, to this, we're talking about elected officials.
Yeah, and we're not talking about city employees here.
And she says it's just a retaliation by 13 Democrats and 1 Republican against Ken Sabota and Ray Lawn Care. Do you feel that's what's going on?
No, no. And I mean, I can understand why there are those who would perceive it that way. If I can honestly say, if this was some means of getting back at somebody or retaliating or whatever, I wouldn't have been involved with it. I mean, I just don't. This is a bigger issue than just Ken Sabota and John Camp. This is something that could affect the city my son grows up in for the next 50 years, and I think we just can move beyond that. I really don't want to get into a nitpicking situation where we're dragging Ken Sabota through the mud. You know,
if we had a nice bright line and everybody knew the rule,
that's right,
we wouldn't have the problem,
yeah.
And we wouldn't have any issues about fidelity one way or another.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a situation of confidence in government.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to me. It gives us the opportunity to be confident that our government is there for us and not self-dealing.
Now you're the president of both of the meetings that were discussed, this whole thing, and the next point is drafted by the chair of the committee with the intention of trying to force John Camp out of office.
Chair's a
Have you
Republican.
looked at the minutes? Is that there?
No, and I encourage anybody to get copies of the minutes involved.
In fact, wasn't there 4 different versions? Four different versions that were brought into the second
We discussed
meeting?
it for a long time. In fact, I was one of the things I was kind of surprised. My first experience with commission was we decided that we'd put it on. We kind of circulate these and look at them, and then we get back together and decide. I didn't realize it was going to be 2 months later. I just thought, well, we can get together next Thursday, can't we? I was like,
well, with 15 members, it's a little harder
I
than
guess
that.
a little harder than that.
But yeah, we did have one
Yeah.
meeting where we tabled the whole idea and asked people to come back, and
With
people
ideas,
came back
yeah.
with ideas.
Yeah.
And none of those ideas were adopted. They were all kind of mixed together. And what we came out was, remember, one of the big points is they want it clear, simple, direct, that there will be no contracting between a business or an individual who owns a business with a significant financial interest. That was one of the big debates. Significant financial interest means more than $5,000 of revenue annually or 5% ownership in the business. So there's a standard here that we're not worrying about what you have in your pension funds to be there. And then the last point Robin brought up was council members have conflict of businesses every week when they vote. She raises the issues of LES bills, and I live in a neighborhood, my tax values benefits from the votes I cast. And I guess my answer to that is this is the difference between contracting with the city, which is a one-on-one deal, and raising LES votes. The LES rates affect us all generally, and we do want you to live in Lincoln and be a part of our system of government, and that effects on the neighborhoods do affect everybody generally. That's kind of like a far stretch from the idea of I've got a contract to lease property to the city that I learned about because I'm a sitting member, and I have an inability to, I guess the one that gets me is that it's not so much the process of getting the contract, it's the process we saw when you had a defaulting situation and the problems where you have a seated mayor on one side of a table against a seated city councilman. Cannot be a good situation. And I understand it was a troubling situation, and we feel that should be behind the city of Lincoln, that our business should be run by people of integrity that have only one loyalty, and that's the public in the city of Lincoln.
I agree.
So, you know, if you go through Robin's 7 points, you find there's nothing here that has any merit at all.